So I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. Most of the participants are from DuPage County, and it seems like you heard about us through the newsletter, and not actually in the website and Facebook. So again, I'm Jan Rail with the Conservation Foundation. Thank you for attending. And I have Melissa Kustick from the Morton Arboretum on the program with us today. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge, let's see, I gotta do a share screen. The share screen's not working. There we go. Share screen. Share. So concurrent slide. So I would like to acknowledge that this program is sponsored by DuPage County Stormwater Management. The program is celebrating OAKtober with a healthy yard. DuPage County Stormwater Management has been a program established in 1989. They are guided by the Stormwater Management Planning Committee. And also they enforce all the stormwater regulation and management throughout the DuPage County. So thank you very much, Stormwater Management, for making this, DuPage County Stormwater Management, for making this program possible. And I am going to go through a couple housekeeping items. And I'll go ahead and put the county logo back up there for a minute. So, everyone is muted and your cameras are off. This webinar is being recorded for everyone to enjoy later. And DuPage County Stormwater will also send out this, the link for your enjoyment. If you have a question, please use the question and answer box. That will let everyone see your question and make it easier for me to find them all. Questions sometimes can get lost in the chat, but I'll answer it if I see them there. For your safety, you should only be able to see what I post in chat, but just in case I missed a setting, don't click any other links than what I may post in the chat. Also, these webinars are offered free to the public. However, we do encourage you to consider a donation or membership. The more people we have attending, the more it costs us to run them. At the end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a page with a bunch of resources of things you may be interested in, including a virtual tip jar. If you're enjoying these webinars, I encourage you to donate to help keep us running. This will also make you a member so you can enjoy our wide variety of membership, members-only stuff. And to sweeten the deal, this year until the end of the year, we have a grant that will be matched by all donations through the end of the year up to $75,000. So if you donate $25, we get $50. So if you're thinking about donating now is a great time. I also want to let you know that next week is there's a webinar, is the Bats of Northeastern Illinois on October 28th. And then the next county webinar is on November 18th, and it's Salt Smart, Save More with Jennifer Hammer regarding how to salt wisely in these coming winter months. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to have Melissa share her screen, and I want to introduce Melissa Kustick. Melissa is the Chicago Region Tree Initiative Specialist, managing projects developed by interagency work groups and helping the Chicago region become the greenest, most livable, most resilient region in North America. Melissa holds a master's degree in plant biology and conservation from Northwestern University, plus a decade of experience in research in education and outreach, was named a Millennial to Watch in 2019 by the Illinois Contractors Association. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Melissa, and she can take it away.
All right, hi folks, thank you for having me. Good afternoon. So yes, I will be here talking to you today about how to celebrate OAKtober in your own backyards with a healthy yard. Oh, that doesn't work. But before I do, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the organization I'm with, which is the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. So we are a collaboration across the 7-county region, more than 200 partners working towards the same goal, or a handful of the same goals. But overall, what we're trying to achieve is that the trees in our region are healthier, more abundant, more diverse, and more equitably distributed. And it really comes down to the people who live with these trees. So yes, I love trees. Yes, I want them all to be healthy and strong and diverse, but it really impacts the people who live among the trees. So that's why we do this. And since I will be talking about how you can celebrate OAKtober in your yard, I thought just a quick slide that has the background of OAKtober would be important. Several of our partners got together and we got the former governor to proclaim that in Illinois, every October is OAKtober, Oak Awareness Month. And it's really meant to be a statewide celebration of our natural heritage, which is oaks and oak ecosystems. So across the state, we have partners who throw events, whether it's tree planting or stewardship event, educational hikes, just fun family fests that they give out oak seedlings or things like that, or they collect acorns and ask people to donate those. It's just across the state, lots of oaky stuff going on. This year, of course, it's been dialed back a lot. There's more virtual events, but there are still things like native plant sales, and there's still stewardship events. There's ways to get engaged. So feel free to go to our website, chicagorti.org/OAKtober. It has more information about OAKtober, about oak ecosystems, information about how to share your own event, and then it also has a link to our events page where we have partners all over who have OAKtober events going on. So moving on. My plan for the next 40 minutes, 45 minutes most likely, is to just get you all convinced that oaks are important and that your yards in particular play a critical role in growing the tree canopy, but also preserving oak ecosystems. Then it's the month of Halloween, so we have to talk about things that are wicked. What I really mean is invasive plants. So some of the biggest troublemakers, let's find out, do you have them in your yard? If so, this is why and how you should get rid of them. Then we'll talk about some more wonderful things. So once you've got those invasive shrubs out, what are some cool things you can replace them with? And of course, anything you plant, you can't just stick it in the ground and walk away. So what are some things you can do to make sure that your trees, shrubs, and the rest of your yard gets to maturity and has its maximum benefits? All right, so starting with the value of your land and oak ecosystems. So at the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, one of our mottos is science to action. So we start with a lot of science. We have data collected across the region on all kinds of things. And so I'm going to be sharing little bits of it here and there. It'll be peppered throughout this presentation. But one of the things we have is a high resolution map of where all the tree canopy is across our region. So when I talk about tree canopy or canopy cover, I'm thinking if you're a bird flying over the region and looking straight down, how much of the ground is covered by tree leaves? So really, how much of the ground is covered by a tree canopy? So in this map, the dark blue color shows where there's more tree cover, and the pale yellow is where there's less tree cover. So there are some things that you notice quickly. Around the edges, where it's more rural, there's more agriculture, so less tree cover. And that it's not evenly spread out. So I've mentioned that we're trying to make it more equitable where the tree cover is. There are patches where we need to get more trees in. But because we have all this data, what we also were able to find out is that 70% of the trees that we already have in this region exist on private property. So when we talk about growing the tree canopy cover, one of the ways to do that is to make sure that the trees that are in the ground continue to stay healthy and grow bigger. So you have a lot of power to influence canopy cover just by watering the trees, making sure that they get plant health checkups periodically. And another batch of information we have, backing up one more second. It's not just that the 70% of the trees are on private property, but in continuing this assessment, most of the plantable space we have is also on private property. So when we think about places to plant new trees, one of the leading potential areas tends to be on private property and on residential land. All right, so moving on, more of the data we collected is about our oak ecosystems. So oaks are critical to the overall health of the trees in our region because oak ecosystems are really the heritage of this area. So, for example, glaciers retreated from our area about 10,000 years ago, and it was right at that point when we started having the oaks come in. So this has been a part of our area for the last 10,000 years. This is a map of where we had oak ecosystems in the 1830s. So this is prior to European settlement, just immediately prior to it. And this is what it looks like as of 2010. So this is what's left of the oak ecosystems that we had in our area. I'm going to do that again just because I know sometimes the visual makes a difference. So 1830s, 2010. We're down to the last 17% of what we once had. So that is really disheartening. But the other side of it is not just that we've lost so much, we've lost almost 85% of our oak ecosystems, but also that what we do have left is broken into smaller pieces that are fragmented, that they're not connected anymore. So to give some numbers to this, can you guys see my mouse? Actually, I can't see her to know, but this first column is 1939. This is how many large parcels of oak ecosystems we had in 1939, and this is how many large parcels of oak ecosystems we had as of 2010. So you'll notice that in 1939, we had one parcel that was more than 1,000 acres and 25 parcels that were between 500 and 1,000 acres. So we had quite a few large parcels of oak ecosystems. By 2010, we only had 6 parcels that were more than 500 acres. So not only are we losing oak ecosystems, but they are getting more spread out and more fragmented. All right, so why is this happening? Well, of course, development has something to do with it. Urbanization, we've spread out, we need more places for people to live. But there's also some interesting patterns happening where even within those parcels, we're not seeing as many young oaks establishing and growing to replace the older oaks that are passing away. You know, oaks are organisms with lifespans. So at some point they will die, and we need to make sure that we have younger oaks there ready to take their place. So one of the reasons we're not seeing as many younger oaks is that the oaks we have evolved to have fire as part of their life cycle, as part of a regular part of their seasons. So I mentioned that oaks came into our region 10,000 years ago, basically as soon as the glaciers retreated. Well, that's also when we started having indigenous people in our region, and they used fire to manage their land. So for as long as we've had oaks, those oaks have had people around them burning regularly. And so once we stopped having fire, we started having a lot of other plants come in, taking over things like maples and basswood trees that are native to some parts of our region, but they've crept in, and it's causing other problems that we'll talk about in the next few slides. So another reason that we're seeing our oak ecosystems not regenerating is that we have quite a few invasive species. And I will define that later, but just know that it's a lot of plants that are coming into our areas that are causing problems. Some of the biggest problems we have are European buckthorn, honeysuckle, multiflora rose, oriental bittersweet, garlic mustard, and Japanese barberry. And a couple of these are plants that you find in a lot of gardens, some of them intentionally. I know you can still buy a Japanese barberry in some areas. Oriental bittersweet, I've seen a lot of yards. Basically, if you have these in your yards, they're spreading easily to the natural areas. And if you have natural areas in your yard, it's probably causing a lot of problems. So this is one of the reasons we're not seeing oaks regenerating. Another problem related to these last two things actually is that there's too much shade in our natural areas. So oaks need to have 30 to 50% of sunlight coming through the upper levels of the canopy in order for them to grow. You know, an oak seedling in the woods, it can actually survive in a higher shade spot and just wait until some of the bigger trees fall down. And then once it has that sunny patch, it'll grow rapidly and shoot up. So people think of oaks as slow growers, but it's really that they're able to sit and wait until they have sun. The problem with that sitting and waiting strategy is that there are other plants, other trees that don't need as much sun. So something like a maple can handle a lot more shade. And so if you have an oak and a maple next to each other, the maple will grow faster and shade out the young oaks. So one of the ways that we can get oaks to grow in the natural areas is by thinning out the trees, cutting down some of the bigger ones, clearing out the invasive species that are providing shade as well. And finally, we have a lot of problems with pests and diseases. There are quite a few that target oaks, and I'm not a pathologist and I'm not a pest expert. So if anybody has specific questions about the pests and diseases that they might be seeing on their oaks, I am just going to refer you to our Illinois Forest Health Outreach Coordinator, Trisha Bethke, who is also a great speaker and great to talk to, but great resource. All right, so oaks are under threat. They are dwindling in the number that we have. They're getting fragmented and spread out, and even the parcels that we have are not regenerating properly. So why do we care? Well, first of all, oaks get to be very big trees, and a lot of their companion species like the hickories and the pecans are also fantastic big trees. So they do all the things that large trees and healthy ecosystems do. You know, they clean the air, they clean the water, they shade our properties, they improve our mental and physical health. So they are just trees that are doing great things. But oaks in particular, and healthy oak ecosystems in particular, also provide a lot of food and habitat for the wildlife that have also been evolving in our region for the last 10,000 years. So there's a lot of species that are dependent on having these oaks around. For example, Doug Ptolemy did a study and found out that oak trees support 534 species of caterpillars, so different caterpillars. So by planting an oak, you're bringing in the caterpillars that can turn into pollinators, or the caterpillars that can feed the migrating birds who really need a lot of protein during their migration. So, you know, if you learn nothing else from this, this talk today, if you want to celebrate Oaktober and you've got the space for it, plant an oak in your backyard and you're really doing a whole lot. All right, so science to action. We have a lot of interesting information collected about where the oak ecosystems are. And the action part is we need to connect them. So this is a neat interactive map you'll find on our website, chicagorti.org/oakmap. Just a quick rundown. This peachy color, these big parts, are where there were oak ecosystems prior to European settlements. These darker blue spots are where we still currently have remnant oak ecosystems. And the purple lines are ways that we've mapped out with lots of partners who have been managing this land. These are corridors that we could be forming by planting oak trees and companion species along these routes to connect the existing remnant populations. So when we talk about conserving oak ecosystems, it's not just about buying up large plots of land and growing like an oak woodland. Sometimes it's just about connecting remnants by having municipalities and park districts planting a lot of oaks and native species in their areas so that, for example, birds can still connect the oak ecosystems. So go ahead and check out this map. It's really kind of neat. You can zoom into your own neighborhood. All right, so your yards are important. That's where the most plantable space is. That's where most of the trees are. And oak ecosystems depend on you. So what could be in your yard that could be causing problems? Well, invasive species. So I'm going to use the Forest Service's definition here. First of all, it's something that's not native to the area. So any kind of plant or animal or, you know, any kind of pest disease that is not from the ecosystem that we're talking about. And then also whose introduction is causing or is likely to cause economic, environmental, or human health damage, basically. So something that's not from around here that can cause damage. And in our area, we did a tree census in 2010, where across the region, we took samples to find out what are the most popular trees, the most commonly existing trees and how big they are. And what we found is that at that point, European buckthorn made up 28% of all the trees in the region, which is kind of a heartbreaking number to find out. Buckthorn is really awful. If any of you have had the chance to go out and do stewardship work where you're cutting buckthorn, or if you've just gone for a hike and noticed that, you know, it's everywhere, we're going to talk more about why it's so bad, but 28% of our trees are this invasive buckthorn. And now in this study, in this tree census, the people on the ground were measuring anything that had at least a 1-inch diameter stem. So we also have honeysuckle that registered on this list. So looking at just the honeysuckle that was at least 1 inch in diameter, it represented 2% of all the trees in the region. So this is across the whole region. So we can look at it specifically in your own communities. I think there are a handful of you that are not from the 7 counties, but this is what we had here. So something like Lake County, if you live in Lake County, 42% of all your trees are buckthorn. That sounds like an awful problem. Some counties, for example, Kendall and Will, they're actually pretty lower on that end, but I'm guessing that they have a lot more honeysuckle because that's what we've been noticing in the distribution. So the further south you are in the region, the more honeysuckle you have versus buckthorn. And a quick thing to note, you'll see in this blue box, each of the forest preserves spend millions of dollars every year battling these invasive species. So if nothing else convinces you that keeping invasive plants in your yard that are spreading to these natural areas, you know, if there's no other thing that is concerning to you, at least think about all the money that's being spent to control these issues that are going to keep happening every year if we have private property adjacent to forest preserves that still have the invasive plants. All right, so I'm going to dive right in. I'm really just going to talk about buckthorn and honeysuckle. And first, I'm going to give you some information about buckthorn and about honeysuckle so that if you have it in your yard, maybe it's easier to identify. So first, when I say buckthorn, I'm really referring to two separate species that look very similar and behave very similarly. So that's common buckthorn and glossy buckthorn. So from here on out, as I talk about them, I'm talking about both, but again, everything I say applies to both. So first of all, they are understory shrubs or small trees that can get up to about 25 feet tall. You'll see they have kind of a loose spreading crown. Usually they have multiple stems. And this last part here is key. They are dioecious. So di meaning two in Latin, aecious meaning homes or houses, so two houses. They have male plants and female plants that keep them separated. If you think you have it in your yard, you can take a look at the leaves. It tends to be egg-shaped. It has a pointed tip. It's usually a dark glossy green color. You'll see at the edge, it has really fine teeth. And then for veins, it's got 3 to 5 pairs of veins. It's also what we call sub-opposite. So these two things I find really help in identifying whether a shrub is buckthorn. So if you think about the branches on a tree, very often you'll have, a main stem and there's branches that come off right opposite of each other. Buckthorn is like that, but slightly off. So if you see something where the branches are just slightly off from being opposite, that's one of the big clues. And then the twigs end in this thorn-like protrusion, which is pointy, so be careful walking through it. Looking more in depth with buckthorn, the bark is very different whether you've got the young stems or the older ones. The young bark is smooth. Here, this picture. It's smooth and gray with lots of big lenticels. So lenticels are these sort of bumps that you see. That's where the gas exchange happens on a trunk. But the older bark gets to be more of a gray-brown color and is exfoliating. So it looks more like the picture on the right. And if you have a chance to cut into a branch or the trunk, one of the really noticeable characteristics also is that the sapwood in buckthorn is this kind of bright orange color. It's got flowers in May through June that you probably won't even notice. They're really just like a pale light green color, kind of unexciting. But right about this time, you'll start to see that it's got these dark purpley bluish berries that are very evident. So if you think of your yard and you see these berries, that's also a good sign, or a bad sign, a good sign of something bad. All right, so the other invasive plant to watch out for is Amur Honeysuckle. This one, unfortunately, is very pretty. It's got opposite leaves. It's got these beautiful flowers that are a white or a creamy yellow that you'll see in May and June. And then the flowers, once they get fertilized, turn into these gorgeous red berries. One of the ways that you can tell for sure if you've got honeysuckle is the stems seem to be hollow. They're not actually hollow, but they do have lots of cavities that you can see. And I mentioned these red berries, they are prolific. So if you've got them, you'll probably have a ton of these berries in your yard. All right, so what's the big deal? Well, in both of these plants, the buckthorn and the honeysuckle, they leaf out earlier than our native plants, and they hold their leaves longer in the season. So they have a longer growing season, which one means that they are able to spend more time photosynthesizing and growing and just have a chance to get bigger. And two, it means that they're crowding out really important other plants, like the spring ephemerals, or just understory plants, the herbaceous plants in the bottom layer. And because that's happening, we're seeing, as these plants get into our native areas especially, so maybe not as much in our backyards, but in the natural areas, we're seeing that as they're shading out these other plants, it's reducing the cover on the ground layer of our herbaceous plants that are holding the soil in. It's also reducing the diversity of plants that we can get to grow. If you have less diverse plants growing, it means you also have less diverse wildlife that can use the area. Another thing to be concerned about here is that this one is specific to buckthorn. It produces a chemical called amodin. So amodin is found in all parts of buckthorn, in the leaves, the stems, the roots, and in the plant itself, in buckthorn, it's functioning to deter herbivores from coming and eating it. It's providing some disease resistance, and it also has some, I think this is maybe not quite as confirmed, some allelopathic impacts. So it gets in the soil and that stops other plants from growing around it. So if you're buckthorn, that's all great. But because it is going into the soil, it's through release, but also as the plant parts decompose. We're finding it in soil, we're finding it in water, and it has a lot of negative impacts on the other wildlife around. So for example, in streams that have high levels of amodin, they're finding that there are mutations and in the eggs of, amphibians. They're finding that there are a lot of mutations happening in amphibian eggs that are in those waterways. And they're seeing smaller population rates in those same areas. They're also finding amodin in bird shell eggs, which have been thinner. So it's affecting the animal populations all around it, and it's also toxic. So we don't really want amodin in our waterways because it'll eventually get to our own waterways, our own drinking. And so I mentioned before that buckthorn and honeysuckle both crowd out other plants, shade them out. The leaves decompose a lot faster. So not only do you have fewer plants on the ground, but now as you get buckthorn leaves falling to the ground, they decompose so rapidly that there isn't, so this picture on the left here is a nice forest floor where you have duff, on top where it's things that are decomposing. Then you have a layer of humus that's just really great organic matter, and it makes the rest of the soil healthier. It attracts a lot of the stuff that lives in the rhizosphere. A whole lot of great stuff in there. Well, underneath buckthorn, it decomposes quickly, and then you end up having roots exposed, and you have problems with erosion where you're reducing the water quality because the soil is getting in there, but you're also losing actual land on the banks. All right, and just to keep hammering in how awful buckthorn and honeysuckle are, this one's specific to buckthorn. If you have a buckthorn hedge near you, you may see that there's birds there frequently, but those berries are actually just terrible for the birds. First of all, they don't have very much nutritional value, and second, they're actually a diuretic. So the birds eat it and they immediately release it, and in the meantime, it's made the birds sick and not provided nutritional benefits. So you're seeing a lot of wildlife that are getting sick, but very frequently they'll go to a neighborhood where there's a lot of buckthorn, and so it seems like this is, one of the primary food sources. All right, so buckthorn and honeysuckle are terrible. I'm going to assume that we already agreed about this, and now you really, really agree about this, and you're ready to take it out of your yards, take it out of your neighbor yards, go to the forest preserves and help them get it out too. So how can we do that? Well, if you have some smaller stems, or maybe just one or two, there are actually tools out there to help you just pull it out. Or you can dig it out. You want to make sure you get the roots and get as much of it out as possible. If you have quite a bit more of it, herbicide it's pretty effective as long as you're doing it right. So you want to cut it low, and then you need to put the herbicide on immediately. So if you have a small stub, you can just cover the whole stump. For the bigger stumps, all you really do is cover the vascular tissue. So that's where everything is pulled in. So if you can just paint it right around the edges, you'll get the vascular tissue and save yourself, a ton of painting and a ton of herbicide. And I know some people are hesitant to use herbicides. So perhaps hire somebody who knows what they're doing if you personally don't want to use the herbicides. Or, really, this is one of those cases where if you don't use herbicide, you'll never fully get rid of it, and you're going to cause a whole lot more problems in terms of, things like this hydra sprout coming out. And if you're using herbicide as it's suggested on the label, in the amounts it says to use, in the concentration it says to use, you can do it safely. And make sure you're using your PPE, of course. Have your gloves, have whatever else you need. But if you don't get rid of things like buckthorn, it's still releasing amodin. So if you're concerned that you're doing damage to the ecosystem by using these harsh chemicals, just remember that by not getting rid of buckthorn, you're also leaving in place something that's causing damage. And there are also foliar herbicides that you can use. Again, this is mostly if you have a field of smaller buckthorn. Maybe you've been doing buckthorn removals for a while, and so you just have this ones coming up from the seeds. And this is one of my favorite tips to give out. If you have a bunch of buckthorn in your yard, maybe it's overwhelming, and the idea of getting rid of all of it is a problem. Or maybe this buckthorn is what is shading your house from your neighbor's house, and you're not ready to cut the whole thing down. Remember that I said that buckthorn is dioecious, so it's got male plants and female plants. So if you can get rid of the female plants, that's a great start, and it's a great way to at least stop it from spreading into the natural areas. And I mentioned that oak ecosystems in particular have evolved to have fire as part of their cycle. So if you have the kind of property where you're allowed to burn it, please do. That will help it immensely. That'll help the oak ecosystems do well, but it'll also help to get rid of a lot of the invasive plants. And just, pro tip, winter is a great time to do this sort of work. So maybe put on some flagging tape or something, or otherwise mark the buckthorn honeysuckle in your yard so you can recognize it in winter and not cut down the things you really like. And then you can go in there and just slowly chip away at it while nothing's growing. Also means that you're not going to be compacting the soil everywhere you go. And I want to make sure that this point is driven home, that the plan that you have in place, that you can't just cut down all your buckthorn and then call it a day. Buckthorn and honeysuckle and all these others, they are invasive for a reason. They are really tough. They are really, they have a lot of built-in adaptations that help them thrive in our area. So you need to come up with a multi-year plan for getting rid of it, whether that's cutting down sections at a time or cutting and herbiciding now and then planning to cut an herbicide every year for a couple of years until they stop coming back. Besides the stumps resprouting, you're also going to have seeds in the seed bank that are going to keep resprouting. So it's going to take a few years to get rid of it. So just expect that. Okay. So this has been a very negative talk so far. So I'm hoping right now that we can switch it over to the more exciting stuff. Once you get these invasive plants out of your yard, now is your chance to put something in that's really more exciting, more beneficial, and provides services to you. So wonderful stuff. We can plant some trees. So I would like very much for this talk to now be about, here are 5 great trees and 5 great shrubs. But we don't want people to only be planting a handful of trees and a handful of shrubs. We want to make sure we are diversifying our region. Excuse me. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about a lot of different species and spread out in different ways. And I have this picture here as an example. In both pictures, you see 4 different species, but on the picture on the top, there's an even number of each. And on the picture on the bottom, there's 4 species, but most of the trees you see are species A. Right, so that's not great diversity. That's good species richness, but it's not great diversity. So we want to make sure that we're planting a variety of species around our communities and also within our yard. So why does this matter? Well, here is a beautiful ash tree lined street. And here it is after the emerald ash borer came through and wiped out all the ash trees. So again, I like to have the visual punch. So here's, a nice green street, and here it is without ash trees alive. So the important thing here is that when you have a lot of different species, especially on these trees, it makes it more resilient when something comes in that one particular tree is susceptible to. So it's not just things like the emerald ash borer that we have to worry about, but also climate change. So this chart has a ton of information. I don't expect you guys to read through it and pick it all up. But the point here is that we're expecting to see a lot of changes in, overall we're expecting to see a high frequency and severity of storms, an increase to both of those. So we will have mild winters, but it's going to be punctuated with ice storms. And we may have warmer than average summers, but there's going to be periods of drought and periods of flooding. And heck, we got that this year, didn't we? So you need trees that can handle different scenarios so that you don't plant all the trees that are they can handle floods but not droughts, and then we get one drought and they're all wiped out. So prepare for a variety of situations by having a variety of trees. And yes, the emerald ash borer came through and wiped out 13 million ash trees across the 7-county region. But it's not the only pest or disease out there that targets specific genera. Asian longhorn beetle, for example, we have eradicated it from the Chicago region once already, but it's been found at O'Hare several times in the last few years and brought out again. So it's one of those threats that keeps coming towards us, and it really likes maple trees. And I've got to tell you, based on our tree census, there were those 13 million ash trees across our region, but we have twice as many maples as we did ash trees. So because we haven't been planting diverse trees, we are vulnerable to another pest coming through and wiping out a huge chunk of our canopy. Okay, so you're ready to plant a tree. You understand that we need diversity. How do we do that? Well, step one, just plant one of the trees that does well in your site. Not only will that help us get lots of different types of trees across the region, but it means that that tree will be healthier with a whole lot less inputs, things like water and efforts, time. So to do that, look at your site where you want a tree. Think about the growing conditions there. How much water does it get? How much sunlight does it get? How close is it to buildings, your house, your garage, your neighbor's house? Are you by utility lines? So, you know, to grow the canopy, we want lots of big trees, but please don't plant any big trees under power lines, because then you're just gonna have to keep pruning that thing until it's miserable. And when you're thinking about trees, there's also some of the fun side to it. So not just what does well in your site, but what do you want out of that tree? Do you want to plant native trees to attract native wildlife, get lots of birds in there, get lots of pollinators? Think also about structure and form. So some trees, they grow really fast, but that means they tend to have weaker limbs. So you don't want to plant something like that over the spot where you park your car or where you have your child's playset. The example I have here is a picture of Callery pear. You may have heard of it, ornamental pear, Bradford pear. They're all basically the same tree. They're awful trees. They're invasive, but that's not what we're talking about here. They also just have really upright branches, which means that they're not as strongly attached to the tree. So just a big, strong gust of wind comes through, or a rainstorm or something, and those branches fall over easily. And the last thing when you're thinking about it, do you want something edible on your trees? You know, you can pick your trees so that they fit in your site, but also provide spring flowers, beautiful fall color, or edible parts, so that you can make use of them. So if you've kind of gone through what it is you want and what your site looks like, we actually have a handy tool at the Morton Arboretum. You can find it at mortonarb.org/tree selector. And you just input your site's conditions, input what you want out of a tree, and there's a box you can check if you want it to be native. And it'll give you a list of all the trees that grow well for that site. And because we want people to plant the interesting trees they find and not just, you know, the ones that tolerate a wide variety of conditions, we want to make it easier for you to find those trees. So if you go to chicagorti.org/nursery tree inventory, this will give you a list of all the nurseries that are carrying each of the more than 200 trees that can grow in our region. So for example, if you use that tree selector tool and it tells you you can plant a shellbark hickory, well, that's fantastic. There's not a lot of those in our area anymore. But where on earth can you find one? Well, it looks like the Byron Nursery in St. Charles has one. So now you know where you can go to find those trees. All right, if you have pulled out a buckthorn hedge or a honeysuckle screen, and now you are just thinking, now what on earth can I put here? CRTI has worked with several excellent partners to come up with these very graphic posters and brochures that can help you pick those species. So for example, maybe rethink your hedge. Maybe instead of just a straight formal hedge, you can just think with more variety in heights and textures. For example, something like this, where there's a tree and there's trees and shrubs and some perennials all around it. The suggestions here include things that grow well in sun or in shade, things that grow in really wet spots or dry spots. But if you do still want more of a traditional hedge, we have another brochure as part of the same series. These are all native shrubs that can be turned into hedges. So some really cool options here. And I know there's a lot to look at. So if you are trying to scribble down things quickly, one, you can see it slower at chicagorti.org/healthy hedges. Or two, I am happy to share this presentation at the end so you have time to really go through and look at it. And of course, if you're ready to do some planting in your yard, look around for native plant sales. I'm going to guess that you are all fans of the Conservation Foundation, and so perhaps you've already all purchased from their native plant sale. But if you're thinking about what to plant in your yard, there are several experts there who are happy probably to weigh in. And for example, these are all oaks that they were selling this past spring at their native plant sale. Maybe you're just trying to figure out which one is best for your yard. Well, the descriptions on these are super helpful. So look at the bur oak. It says that it's tolerant of heavy clay soil, so fantastic for a lot of our yards. And that it needs high pH, open areas, and full sun. Well, if your yard looks like that and you have room for an 80-foot tree, fantastic. Please plant this tree, and at the same time, you get to support those local conservation groups. So it's another fun way to figure out a great tree or shrub or other plant to put in your yard. All right, so these next several slides, I'm going to breeze through. It's going to show perhaps you were thinking of planting this one plant. Here are some better options that are native. For example, I already mentioned the Callery pear, and that it's terrible and has stinky white flowers. I did mention that they're stinky, but they are. So perhaps you were going to plant one, or maybe you just had one in your yard that fell over in a storm, and so you're going to replace it with something. Well, if what you liked about it was its pretty spring colored flowers, here are 3 native shrubs that can have pretty good height and still provide that. So I have the Latin names to make sure you're getting the right one, but starting from the top, that is the pagoda dogwood. It's got really cool branching patterns. We have Crataegus mollis, that is downy hawthorn. There's quite a few hawthorns out there, but beautiful flowers. And then there's the wild plums. So the added benefit of planting these is that they can handle diverse situations. So, you know, get the right one. Wild plums do great in wet areas, for example. You still get the gorgeous white flowers, but you're also supporting a lot of pollinators and birds. Burning bush. So perhaps you have this in your yard and you don't want to get rid of it because it's just got gorgeous fall color. And I will give you that. It's got gorgeous fall color. But you know what else does? Hazelnuts. So you can see here on the right, that is American hazelnut, with the added bonus that it provides something you can eat. So it's got edible fruits on it. It might be that the raccoons get to it first, and I apologize for that, but you know, keep trying. Get those in your yard, get rid of the burning bush. Maybe what you're looking for is a nice, tall, deciduous hedge. I've seen things like lilacs and Japanese tree lilacs used for that. And there's nothing really wrong with lilacs. I have heard that there may be some problems with Japanese tree lilac, but that's nothing confirmed yet. But if what you're looking for is just a tall, deciduous hedge, there's quite a few options. For example, we have Lindera benzoin, which is spice bush. Swallowtail butterflies rely on this, so this is a nice way to attract those and support them. We've also got the nannyberry viburnum, which again, look at those beautiful flowers. So you can have a nice hedge of that, which is really, really dense and also providing other benefits. Maybe you just want something, a short border kind of hedge. And I've seen boxwood used very often when it's just mostly to define the edges of things. But if you want a similar effect, you can use wild black currants, which again also provides a fruit that you can then eat or turn into delicious jelly. All right, so just make sure that you're using the right plants for the right place. And then just plan that this is not going to be an immediate change in most cases, but you can do this in small steps. Sorry, so this is after the first season, you'll see that it's filling in. Here's 2 seasons later, you can take out all that buckthorn and replace it with some nice sedges and some trees that'll fill in. This is a dense forest, just a solid block of forest. A solid forest is not a healthy forest, but once you clear out all that buckthorn and honeysuckle, you can see there's already native plants coming in. And just when you're doing your own landscaping, some things to think about is to challenge yourself to be really creative, to try a new species every year. Diversify what's in your yard, which will help diversify across the community and across the region. Think about it in phases and layers. So, you know, there's no pressure to try to get rid of all your invasives and replace them all with a full landscape in one season. You don't have to do that, but, you know, pull things out that are invasive and then start with things like the trees, the shrubs, then add perennials. You can do it in layers. And just at every step, think about ecosystem value. So it might be that you have some non-native plants in your yard and you love them. Maybe it's something that's been handed down through generations in your family, just something personal. But also think about maybe pairing that with some native plants to go around it. So make it last once you get these all in your yard. The best way to do that is to take care of them and also to start right. So this is particular to planting trees. If you spend a little extra time planting your tree the right way, it'll make sure that the tree lives a longer life and is healthier along the way. So the most critical part here is that once the tree is in the ground and you've got the soil back filled in, you should be able to see where the trunk flares into the roots. You should see that flare once it's above the ground. Sorry, for lots of reasons that I don't have time to go into. But once it's also planted at the right depth, you should also be mulching it. And I want to be clear that you're not mulching the tree, you're mulching the soil around the tree. So put the mulch down 1 to 3 inches deep, as wide as you're comfortable going around, and then pull it back. It should not be touching the bark at all. So why am I telling you to mulch your trees? Why does this matter? Well, for one, it supports microorganisms. So all the stuff that lives in the soil that creates a good ecosystem for your tree, those organisms start by breaking down the mulch, and they break down the tree roots, and it creates a much healthier environment. And plus, having those microorganisms, you know, they have waste products like we all do, and theirs are very acidic. So in our area, our soils tend to be alkaline. By adding acidic waste from the microorganisms, you're actually making our soil more neutral, which is healthier for most trees. The mulch also helps to retain moisture in the soil, and it helps to regulate temperature. And mulch is great as long as you are doing it right. So just to reiterate, you're mulching the soil, you're not mulching the tree. So the mulch should never touch the bark of the tree. If you do have mulch piled up like that, what ends up happening is that the roots, you know, trees are not thinking creatures. They're not doing anything intentionally. But through a variety of tropisms, the roots will grow where it's easiest to grow and where they get what they need. So if they're near the surface, they're going to start to grow up into the mulch rather than down into maybe compacted soil or rocky soil, whatever you've got in your yard. They will grow up through the mulch because it's just easier to do that, and they end up circling around the tree. So you can see that these roots have started circling around the trunk. And at this size, you can cut those circling roots and straighten them out, and that will do a lot of good for the tree. But trees take a long time to die. So if you've had mulch piled up for a long time on the trunk, those roots will keep getting bigger and the tree will keep getting bigger. And what you end up with is a tree that, as it hits those roots, it can't grow past them. It'll stop growing on that side. You know, maybe go for a walk after this and look around your neighborhood. You'll see flat sides to trunks where those roots were cutting off the tree's ability to grow. We call that girdling. It's girdling the tree. It also means that at the base of the trunk, you are opening it up to rot and to infections. And so what you end up with is a pretty big tree, a pretty heavy big tree with a rotten base, which I don't think any of us want. All right, so another way to take care of your tree, besides planting it right, mulching the soil, and watering it regularly, even the big trees need water, is keeping an eye out for pests. So we have this handy guide, which I'm happy to share with the Conservation Foundation so they can share it with all of you if they don't already have it. And it's just a great guide that talks about invasive plants and invasive pests that you should be aware of and looking for on your property, and different signs that you can see in different seasons. I'm going to guess that most of you are already Conservation at Home members. But if you are not, and if we have anybody from these communities, we are actually going to be partnering with the Forest Preserves of Cook County on their Conservation at Home program, which is much newer than the Conservation Foundation. So they're sort of still in the very beginning. But if you know anybody who lives in these areas, we have somebody on our staff who got a grant to go to homes in those areas to help them and give them their site assessment to become part of the Conservation at Home program. And on your own properties, if you've already gotten rid of some of your invasive hedges or just any invasive plants on your yard, or if you're about to and you just need an extra incentive, we have this program where you can give us information about your site, let us know what you got rid of, and we'll send you a sticker that you can put up on your mailbox, on your window, whatever makes sense to you. It's one of those window clings that can be removed. You can get some recognition for the work you're doing and let your neighbors know, yes, I took down this buckthorn hedge between our properties, but I'm doing this because it's better for the ecosystem around here, because it's better for all of us. And hopefully that gets them inspired to do the same. You can find this form at chicagorti.org/healthyhedges. And that's it. So if you have any questions, I am happy to take them.
Thank you, Melissa. There is a question here, and it was, do you have a recommendation for a great buckthorn removal tool to get small stumps out of the ground?
Off the top of my head, I do not, but I'm happy to look that up because I've seen the tool, but I don't know the name of it.
Okay. Well, I do have a question because you mentioned all the benefits of trees, and also I wanted to say that Melissa mentioned the Conservation at Home program in Cook County, but if you're interested in a DuPage County, and this program is also sponsored in partnership with us by the DuPage County Stormwater Management, we have a Conservation at Home program here in DuPage County. And if you'd like a free visit or tour, a visit or help with your yard, myself or Jim Kleinwachter can come out to your house and give you advice on what you can do to remove the natives and how to improve your yard. But the question I have is, we're talking, since this program is sponsored by the Stormwater Division of DuPage County. What do trees do about water issues?
Oh.
What do oaks do?
I'm going to answer it more generally, just trees in general. Oaks are fantastic, but they don't do anything that's different from other really large trees when it comes to water. And so really, trees do a number of things. The first thing that most people don't really think about is that they actually hold water in place. So one of the problems with basement flooding is that water gets rushed to the sewer system, gets rushed to great infrastructure, and it moves really fast and it gets there quickly, and then it backs up through our sewer system. But leaves will actually slow that process down because they have the bigger trees, they have all the leaves that then capture the water and it holds it. So it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but that's actually a huge thing. I think a tree can hold on to 10,000 gallons of water per year doing that. And then the other thing is that they are actually cleaning the water as it goes. So as they are absorbing it through their roots, as it's passing down them, it's getting cleaned so that it's, by the time it reaches a waterway, it's already been filtered quite a bit.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Melissa. Oh, and some questions have come in here. So let's see. How can you get the herbicide?
You can go just to a big box store. I recommend going to something like Ace. This is a bigger conversation to make sure you're getting the right herbicide, but feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with the right sources. We do have some guides about which herbicides to use and where to find them, but generally just going to something like Ace for your own yard should be good enough.
And it says, can you please repeat the site that finds plants at local nurseries?
Yep, that is chicagorti.org/nursery tree inventory.
Okay. Next question. Are there any varieties of oak trees that are more disease resistant than others?
I don't have a good answer to that question. I know that there are quite a few cultivars out there that are being bred for different things, but I don't know any that are specifically being bred for disease resistance. And I know that, you know, whether you've got a white oak or a red oak, or bur oak, they've all got something specific to them. So not what I can easily answer, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. And then next question is, what about cutting buckthorns down to about 6 inches, spraying with herbicide, and then covering with thick black plastic and tying with the zip ties? I read this really kills the roots eventually.
I have seen some good stuff. I think there's actually a group in Wisconsin that they developed, they call them buckthorn baggies. So it sounds like that's the homemade version of that, which is fantastic. Yeah, if you have few enough that you can do that, that's great. It seems pretty labor intensive otherwise, you know, if you have like acres of them. So yeah, I think that's the method that has definitely shown some good results.
And then someone had a question again about herbicide. What's the best brand of herbicide and where to get it? And you just answered that with the big box stores. Are gypsy moths a problem in our area, and will they kill oaks?
Sorry, I'm definitely not a good person for pests and diseases specifically. I do recommend reaching out to Trisha Beth Key, who is the Illinois Forest Pest Outreach Coordinator for the state of Illinois. And if you got that guide with the pest and disease, it does talk about gypsy moths. I know they are a problem, but they have some years that are worse and some years that are better. And so I don't know how things are going right now. Okay, so right now, let me see. I think we've answered all the questions. And let's see, with that, oh wait, again, what herbicide could be used? So with that, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you, Melissa, for your presentation. This was great. Again, this will be on our YouTube channel afterward, and also it will be distributed by DuPage County Stormwater Management for your viewing also. So thank you, and with that, we're going to end the webinar, and I appreciate your help, and thank you to Melissa and the Morton Arboretum. All right, happy October, everybody. Yep, bye-bye.